Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. After the success of our Chaos menu covering FX's The Bear, we come back with a double bill of guests covering Killers of the Flower Moon. Today, we have Makeup Department Head Thomas Nellen, who joins us to talk about his work on the film. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Thomas. Hi, Thomas. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Bobby, for having me.
We're here to talk about Killers of a Flower Moon. That was released recently. What can I say? What an epic of a film. I know people are slightly concerned about the length of it and whatnot, but at the same time, it's so great to be in an environment where they let scenes breathe and let the film breathe to then pull you in and keep you on the edge of your seat, and how important this story is to be told.
Well, I mean, I agree the movie is long. It's like over 3 hours, but at the same time, I found that, I mean, I've seen it a few times now, and I feel that the fact that it is more than 3 hours actually helps for, to really dive into the story and observe all the details and just feel the pain. It's at times like like for the last half an hour, you move back and forth on your seat, but it's part of the experience.
Agreed. And I think even though I know some films of that sort of length can be like, oh, I might be getting numb in the bum, but there's stuff where you kind of look at it and it's like, what can you cut out? What would you take out? You can't. You need to let that slow burness really reveal what is happening and have that sort of moment of, oh, this is happening, oh, this is clicked, this is going on.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely a movie that actually sinks in after you've actually seen the movie. I mean, I've been with the first time. I was concerned that it might be because of the all the stars we had, the cast, that it would maybe be a Hollywood popcorn movie, which I think Marty did a fantastic job by actually telling it in a way that is almost like a documentary style at times, and you forget who these people are. It's not that you just think of them as Bobby De Niro or Leonardo or Lily, for that matter. You really dive into it, and it leaves you space to observe it and let it sink in. Yeah.
I think you need those moments as well where even the exchanges between Leo and Lily in their sort of build up to what happens to the end of the film, but the same with also Leo with Bob De Niro and how he's getting his fingernails into him and sort of planting ideas of what he needs to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But before we get into that whole bit, I'm curious, how did the project come about and what is it that made you want to take it on?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm from Switzerland, and I live in LA, though. I've been living in Los Angeles for the last 30 years, and I had time to spend some time with my folks in Switzerland. So I was there having a good time on a vacation, and one day the phone rang at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and because Switzerland is 9 hours ahead of Los Angeles time, and so I guess our line producer Daniel Lupi thought he'd give me a call at the end of the day, which would be 3 o'clock in the morning my time. And I was really, and for some reason I turned it off, didn't put it on mute, my phone that night. And so I picked it up, and it took me a moment to figure out who that was and what is it and what is this all about. And he said, I just want to check on your availability, and briefly told me what it is and who it is with and all that. And of course, at that moment, I mean, I sat straight in my bed and I thought like, oh my God, oh my God, this is a lifetime opportunity, as I was a big fan of Marty's already, and, and all the cast. And so I told him that even if I didn't have the time, trust me, I will make the time.
Isn't it funny how these certain things in like these life moments where you didn't turn your phone on silent or turn it off, and then you must have been, because when you wake up as well, you're slightly disorientated. You must have must have thought you were dreaming for a second, being like, what is going on?
Yeah, and then of course you think, oh my, as you just said, I mean, you think, oh my God, if I had turned off that phone, or if I, hadn't picked up, what if? But then maybe I would have listened to it the next morning, and maybe, or maybe things would have turned out totally different. They would have told me, you know what, it's too late. We found already somebody. I don't know how many calls they put out there, but I think it was, it was a very selective group of people that was chosen to be part of that project. And so I felt, I felt very honored and humbled by the suggestion.
And again, amazing, isn't it? Really, just perfect timing. And I guess as well, if you get that sort of phone call, do you want to work on a Martin Scorsese picture? It's like a bit of a no-brainer, right? You can't really turn it down.
Yeah, exactly.
But with a film like this as well, because it's based on true events, where do you begin with your research? Does with it being based on true events, does that make it easier for you to find looks and have so much more resources to look at when researching? And plus you can look at specific people to know how they looked during that time period.
Well, when I mean, I usually, I get a script and then I read it, make a breakdown. That means I make notes for every character, what their thread is through the movie. They go from, where do they start, and what do they, or where do they end up? And so, of course, because this story takes place in the 1920s, I obviously the next day after I got that phone call, I started researching 1920s French fashion and European fashion during that time, because, as you know, the story takes place in the 1920s, where the Osage nation found oil of their property and became the richest people per capita in the world. So that there was a lot of money to be spent, and a lot of people took advantage of the French fashion, the women French fashion influences. So we had people with silk dresses and blouses and the pointy shoes and hairdos, hairstyles, and keeping to the tradition of at the same time keeping the tradition of wearing those blankets. And so once I didn't know that at the time. I just researched the period, and when I got to Oklahoma, of course we had lengthy discussions and conversations with indigenous instructors, members of our crews, and people before and behind the cameras, and Zoom meetings with Marty, what he was looking for. I learned a lot about the indigenous people, about their traditions. And of course, I learned about the weather in Oklahoma, which had a big factor in actually trying to keep certain looks because of the humidity, and just the weather was changing like every 5 minutes. So first I did my research about the French fashion 1920s, and in Oklahoma I really dove into the Osage part.
Because I guess as like audience members, we don't really realize the certain issues that crew will have the day to day. And I think you flagged one up as well, as like the weather, the sort of, because it changes so often. What sort of issues and problem solving does that occur for you? In terms of like heat, for example, if it's quite hot a few days in a row, how does that affect the makeup for the cast?
Right. Well, one big factor was the humidity. It was like a 95% humidity, and because we shot that movie during the peak of COVID, everybody had to wear masks. We had to wear a mask, goggles, and face shields, and in the beginning rubber gloves. And of course, the rubber gloves. I mean, I could deal with all the things in my face, but like, just because I have to touch people, and you have a sensitivity in your fingers, those gloves, I just couldn't do it. And so I told them, well, I mean, I'll be happy to disinfect my hands like every 5 minutes, but I cannot put glue or put a mustache on somebody's face and my glove would actually stick to the face. And during the shoot, because it's not shot in chronological order, started when it was we still had snow flurries, and then all of a sudden it was hot, and then we had snow flurries again, and then it was fall. So between during those times, people would wear the same costumes basically. And because it was very, Marty felt very strongly about the authenticity of the project. So some members would, the men too, would wear like long woolen long johns, 3-piece woolen suits, and on top of that, those blankets. And it was muggy and hot, and the people between takes would wear their masks. So when they would take off their mask when we got ready to shoot, their half of their, they were sweaty, the masks were wet, the mustaches didn't hold up. At times, people basically had a mustache in their mask because it just would fall off. And then you try to, just quickly adhere that back to the face, or like just make it just didn't work. So we had to come up with ideas and figure out things of how to actually prevent the mustaches to fall off in the first place by applying like layers of like it's like a plastic that you adhere to the skin, and then on top of that, so they wouldn't sweat through that, and then on top of that we could apply the mustaches. And of course the women, we would just plot down and making sure that the makeups would stay. So also we had to sometimes change the makeups, that it would be waterproof, sweat resistant, so we wouldn't just plot it off and have it in our Kleenex rather than on their faces.
I think again, it's like amazing to think how much you guys have to think about and how much you probably have to reapply and worry about. Because I think as well, like imagine like halfway through a scene, somebody's doing a take, they're performing their heart out, and then you just see the mustache like fall off halfway through just because of the heat. And just those sort of things as well. You don't want, obviously, you want the authenticity of people's looks to come on screen, but then also like how many times you might need to go in to do final checks again and again and touch people up on what might be slightly off or might come down from people's sweat. And it's just like, unfortunately, it's like natural for people to do that. So it's like you're fighting a losing battle, because if somebody gets hot quite quickly, it's like it's just nonsense. You just have to be on hand to be there just to help them out and get it correct, any sort of mishaps or not.
Yeah, and then of course we had all those masks in between takes, and after a while, we sunscreened everybody and everything, but after a while, they would take the masks off and you would see a slight hint of like a white rubber band sides of their faces. So then you have to take care of that too, so it doesn't look like, oh, they just took their mask off.
Wow, it's like that as well. Or they could have like the if there's a slight sort of like a farmer's tan of where the mask was to where the makeup is applied as well.
Yeah, exactly.
That must
And
be gone.
And as we said earlier on, like the movie's not shot in chronological order, so that means you start maybe with a scene from it depends on location. Maybe you only have that location for a few days, or for whatever reason, but you shoot like maybe the middle of the movie in the beginning, and the beginning at the end, and then the end like two-thirds through the movie. So in order to keep that the continuity. And we had to, because people, when they first started coming in March, I was in Oklahoma in March, and all the people that came into our trailer, the indigenous people, they were paler than I was. And the first thing they said to me was like, you have to understand that in like 3 months from now, even if I don't spend time in the sun, I'll be at least like 3 shades darker than I'm now. And which happens to me too, just by, it's just the nature of it. And so we had to come up with a plan to actually make darken the skin tones a little bit, warm them up like 3 shades. And then as we got along through the story and people actually started to tan up themselves, we then could actually pull back of a product and use different, tinted oils and things to actually just to keep the skin tones. So otherwise, you walk up to a door all tanned, and once the door slams shut, you're all pale again. That part had been shot like in the beginning, and the other part, the walking up, was shot like 3 months later.
Because one of my questions was about, because I do have a question about the whole chronological order shooting bit, but I think you raised a really important point as well, is like how different skin tones and feels of each person is. It sounds like they were very good internally, like just a heads up in a few months' time. we won't be like this at all. So that probably gave you another sort of headache as well of like, oh, keeping that same sort of skin tone throughout until when you had to sort of go from, oh, we'll have to go from 100% for the first few weeks, and then the next few weeks we'll keep it at 80, and then when it gets to the summertime, draw it back to only just 30%, for example.
Yeah, no, I was very glad and happy about that information, because then we could actually prepare for that much more so than if we would have just started shooting and then one day you realize they're all of a sudden much darker, and you have to then sort of lighten everybody's skin tones up. So that way we could actually prepare for exactly that, and it worked out perfectly, actually.
That sort of planning would probably be so important because it could trip you up further down the line what's happening. But you were talking about as well with the shooting in chronological order, and this was a long shoot. I think I read somewhere it was about 150 days, which is pretty brutal when it comes to shooting wise, because I think the most I've ever done is about 125 days, and that felt like there's some days where you just think like, wow, this is, even though we're on day 60 or halfway through, it still feels like a massive marathon to get a film made. But with it not being shot in chronological order, how do you go about keeping on top of the continuity and then also potential time changes, not just in different days of shooting, but also in the time changes also in the same day of shooting?
Right. Well, actually, first, as I said, you do a breakdown of everything that's going on, and who is in what scene and what happens in that scene and who had been in the prior scene. And so you have you map it out and you can pin that to a wall, and when you get the call sheet for the next day, you can actually compare notes with the scenes that are going to be shot and what that implies, and you let the AD department know that between scene number 27 and scene number 25, I have to change certain people's makeup. Either they have to come back to the trailer because it's more time consuming, or it's something that I can actually do on set because we're in the middle of nowhere, somewhere on location. But you have to be really careful to take continuity pictures, and you write that down and make those notes, because you have an idea of how somebody's going to look or what something is going to look like, and then it ends up being different than what you had expected. And because of that, then you have the images and the photos that you can look at and compare to then work on the continuity back and moving forward.
So if you have, this is just sort of like more of a curiosity question from my mind that's come to my head. If you have, let's say, scene 25 is based in 1925, and then you have to go back to that same period a few days later on, with your continuity photos, how hard is it to sort of look at it and then create the look again? Or is it just a case of looking at the photo once and being like, oh no, I know what I need to do and touch up on people's faces? Or is it a case of that you need to take a bit more time just to make sure that the continuity is like 100% perfect from the photo taken a few days ago?
Well, I mean, the way I work is I'm like a visual person, and once I've done something, it's kind of like in my gene pool kind of thing. So if I do something, if I put something on your face today, and I have to recreate that in 3 days later, I work from memory in a way. I mean, I look at the picture and compare the notes that I had taken, but at the same time, you know exactly where you were, what you did, what brush you used, how much product, and what you applied. And because if you then took another brush or you did something, then it feels wrong, and I didn't do that. I just didn't do, or I wouldn't do that. So yeah, I think it's a combination of being organized, and then so the artistry and the organization, I think, sort of they start blending. Where you do your job, you do your artistry at the same time you relate to what you had putting together for the shoot.
Okay, because I always think, I guess everybody works very differently in how they want to recreate the looks for each day. But I think it's very fascinating to hear how you're working from memory But also you're probably referring to the photos, but just how amazing it is, like as an artist, that you work from memory to build up what you did from a few days ago. And it kind of does blow my mind a little bit, just how as an artist that you can do that and just go about your work and then for it to look so good as well.
Thank you. No, I mean, it's because sometimes I watch a movie and somebody has, like, let's say, a scratch on their forehead, and then it's sort of fresh and then it's bleeding, and then the next day it's not bleeding anymore, and then it starts to be scabby, and then 3 days later, or like in the movie, 5 minutes later, that scab is gone and it's bleeding again, or what? I mean, or the cut is in a totally different place. And that really pulls me out of the movie, out of the story, then because I'm obviously an observer and looking at our work. So I always want to make sure that this doesn't happen. But sometimes it happens in the editing room. You have no control over. Maybe they feel like, well, this scene would work better if we would add it ahead of, or put it in ahead of the next scene, and then you don't know. But from what I can do is I can make templates when I have a continuity, like a cut or a wound somewhere. I make templates so I know exactly where that wound goes on a daily basis, using maybe even freckles as a indicator where it starts and where it ends, or make actual templates.
Again, with continuity as well, it can take you, as you said, it would pull me out as well, where 1 minute it's like bleeding and the next minute it's all scabbed up. It wouldn't feel right, especially in the scene. But I think there's a scene in this movie that I think is really well done in terms of how the makeup sort of changes. So it's the scene of where the house is bombed and Leo goes out. So obviously after going to bed, Leo's got a clean face. But once he comes back, you see him slightly sort of has a little bit of soot on his face and sort of like from the fire and debris. And I quite like that little detail that as an audience member, you wouldn't really think about the soot that comes onto your face and clothes. But when he sort of comes back, then you think like, oh, actually, that's a really cool creative thought and idea that I wouldn't have thought of at the time.
Yeah, and that has to do again with those breakdowns and the continuity lists you do, because you know that when he, in between leaving the house and coming back, you might see him at the scene going through through the soot and through the beams and all of that, and trying to help in finding people. So then, because that scene might be shot way later, and we see him leaving and we see him coming back, but then because you know what happens in between and you have a plan for that, then you can actually create that ahead of time.
And it all comes down to planning all from the beginning and making notes of what you want to do. But you did bring up a point as well when you're talking to the natives about their looks and feels. But when you're discussing with them about how they're researching, creating the look as well, but then there's also being respectful to their traditions and their culture. How do you go about as an artist sort of taking the information that you have and then also replicating it in a manner that is respectable on screen? So I think a good example is when Molly's mum dies and there's a scene where she wakes up and there's some tribes people who are in a traditional look. I think they're painted red. One of them's painted red. I can't remember from the top of my head how the other person looks. But when you're doing stuff like that, like how do you go about making it respectable for it to be on screen?
Well, of course, it's about, you have consultants that we were very, because it was such a delicate subject matter and we didn't want to do anything that's not in their interest or in their belief. So we had always consultants that we could come show colors, flat color, is it a shiny color? Is it actually originally, would it be berries, or is it fats, or is it mixed with fruit and plants and flowers all mixed together? And we talked a lot. I mean, there was nothing I did without consulting with anybody that would sort of jeopardize the integrity and the authenticity of the look of the movie.
I think as well it's important if you're coming into a whole different culture and time, being aware of what's going to be right and what's wrong as well. Because I think it could be like a fine line of like making it like a parody to what you really want to show on screen as well.
As we mentioned earlier on, it was shot in the 20s with the French fashion and European fashion influence. So we had some Osage that were remained more traditional during those times, even though they would maybe wear more fashionable clothing. But in terms of makeup, like their faces, they would not wear any makeup. And I can't stress enough that that no makeup look doesn't mean that there is no makeup involved. Oftentimes, it takes actually longer to create such a look, to make it look as though there's nothing on their faces than if somebody's makeup is obvious, because then it's about colors, it's about boldness, it's about shapes. Where with like Molly, for instance, she was a more like a traditional, like mom, like Lizzie. And then you have Anna, who's more like the outgoing, like with her little, fashion hairstyle, her clothing, her makeup, and again taking Oklahoma and the weathers into consideration. Again, that was part of the plan, like how to go about it, like continuity, except that you make notes and you make sure that they actually look so that you feel skin, because I always feel like the more skin I see, even in everyday life, the closer I feel to the person, I can relate to the person, and I'm not looking at a mask. And because that's skin, you have, I don't know, it vibrates and it's sort of little going like those little zzz going back and forth. Where if you have a full-on makeup on, it creates like a wall between you and the person you're talking to. Like glasses sometimes can be like that too. I had glasses in my life for like 5 minutes, and then I decided, then I had LASIK because I I don't know that the glasses, because I started when I was like 45 or so. All of a sudden, I felt like there was always this wall between, or like this blind between me and the other person. And I felt much closer when I took my glasses off and was actually able to see the person one on one. And so I feel about this the same way about makeup. Still, the more skin you feel, the closer you feel, the more you can identify with the person. And yeah, so there's a lot more that goes into actually creating makeup than just putting the product on. It's the whole idea behind it and the thought process. I think it's very important.
I guess as well, like skin tells a story about people and how they look. So if you have scars, for example, or even freckles or wrinkles or certain things or certain blemishes that people have as well, of like, or I wonder what that might be about or what goes on, what's happened there. I think you look at Ty Mitchell's character, for example, who has the scar down the sides of his face, which I think actually is a proper scar. But you kind of think like with his character being a bootlegger, like you kind of think like I wonder what the backstory must be about for that. Did he get it whilst he was like a furnace might have not furnace, but like the brewery might have exploded or something, or did he get it from something else? There's all these little nooks and crannies of people that you think that like creates their character as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, I worked with him before on a movie, and this was years and years ago. And in the meantime, he had a horrible, if we want to talk about Ty, I mean, he had a horrible accident from, I think it was a horse, and that actually fractured his skull and everything. So, I mean, he looked authentic and real, which actually helped us in the story. So, and we didn't want to sort of like take that away, or even his eye and everything. That was him.
Yeah, and because I wasn't sure if that was part of the look when after I saw the film to sort of research some of the different characters, and I thought because there was also one of the questions that have kind of come to my mind as well is like because he does have one eye is disfigured. I thought that might have been like a makeup choice, but it wasn't. It's the same with the scar. But what what I was curious to know about as well, like were you guys involved with like the teeth side of things as well? And if there were people who had problems with their eyes or little things like that as well?
Yeah, that's all makeup. I mean, this movie was really a collaborative team effort and included everybody's artistry and the knowledge that everybody brought to the table. And we spent a lot of time, talking about facts. And because of the COVID situation, we weren't able to mingle after work or go out in groups and party and have big dinners and stuff. So the time we actually had together, we actually spent it on set together. And I think because there's oftentimes on a movie you meet after work and you go for dinner and then you talk about the past day or you talk about the next day. And here that time was spent on set, because after work everybody would basically go home and stay in their hotel rooms. And so of course we had a lot of time on set to figure things out, about looks, about people that hadn't started yet. And like the costumes, how do they if somebody has a proper costume, and obviously then you would think, or like a fresh and shiny, a modern costume, you would think their teeth would be according to that, so they wouldn't have like rotten teeth and the most fashionable clothing. So yeah, that's all part of us. And then of course in that case, either you have something made, or like if somebody has really bleached white teeth, you would just take them down a little bit, so they're not just like when they talk. So and your lead actor stands next to that person, and the basically the BG person or this person says something, and all you can see is those white teeth in a situation where it's not appropriate for them to have those teeth, or it looks just wrong, it takes you out of the picture, or you look at that instead of something else, then of course you tone that down a little bit.
I think the best like example for teeth is Leo when he smiles, and then you just see these like horror. Basically, they look like wood for teeth, and it feels like in this film that what it doesn't shy away in this film, sorry, is that like you're not afraid to make people look quite, as in because they're Hollywood stars, we always see them in like always look pristine and perfect, sort of perfect. But I think in this film, it doesn't shy away from making those pretty people look really horrible and sort of just like all grimy and being part of that world, which again is like another reason for like the authenticity of the film and it doesn't shy away from it, because sometimes some of these films do, and you'll see like a Western and someone looks like perfect, not a hair out of place. They look like they have a bath at least 2 times a day, rather than those sort of times that might be once a week, for example.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was the department head on that movie, and Sean Grigg and Kathy Blondell were Leo's personal. Leo had a personal, and so did Robert De Niro. And of course, all the designs that were made, like even what happened, I don't want to go into the details because I didn't do it. Everything that had been done was always with the idea that to create an authentic look for the character, because this is a historical figure that could be. We had an amazing research department ran by Marion Bauer. She was one of our producers, and we had access to folders and files and headshots of all these people that, from the front, from the side, their silhouettes, their looks. So we were able to take those and actually recreate those characters. Leo was one of them. And so I think they did a fantastic job by giving Leo a look that actually takes away. It was really great for his part, for his. I think it supported his performance, and it helped him to get into his character. And it took away from Leo the star, so you could actually look at the character and you could forget that it's actually Leo.
Yeah, and it feels like what this film kind of felt like for me was like they took his boyish charm from Titanic and then just really went from the opposite side of the scale, that he's just some really like greasy unkept person who didn't really look after himself, especially now that he's come. And then also he's been weathered by being in war and being away from sort of the homely comforts that you would have, rather than being in World War I, where you're in the trenches and you're sort of. I know he was a chef in the cook side of it, but I can imagine that not being quite nice to work in either.
Mm. And I thought actually in the movie that was very well done. The transition from the original footage to where we're in that bus where he's sitting in, and to actually when he turns, from black and white, it turns color. I thought that was very well done, because that also, when you see him then in black and white, you would totally believe that this is a character from the time.
Yeah, it's transitioning from like as an audience member, you'd see from the time those sort of photos to now you're into this world. And I agree. I think that's a really well intro into the world and seeing what's going on after finding out that the Osage people have struck oil, and what is this. You're as an audience member, you're thrown right into the middle of the world, rather than sort of you're thrown into the middle of it with Leo at the same time. So you're not ahead of him and you're not behind him. You're kind of experiencing it in real time with him.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there's we talked about collaborations, and I can imagine you collaborate a lot with the costume design, also of course as well with hair design. And you also mentioned about how certain actors had their own personal people looking after them as well. How do you guys go about collaborating with one another so that you all have a moment to shine with all your looks, but then also not overshadow one another? But then because you have you have actors who are looked after specific people, do you just let them have their own creative freedom, or do you guys have discussions about this is the overall look, this is what we're going to go for, let's get on the same page of how everybody's going to look and feel?
I'm the personal of somebody. I've been I've been working with Jeff Bridges for the last 25 years, and I'm his personal. And so it's actually great to see both sides, the side of the department head and the side of the personal. As the personal, of course, you support the actor that who hired you in the first place, because like if you work a lot, they don't want to go every time and sit in somebody else's chair and feel different. People talk to have a different touch, or it feels different, or they have a different approach to characters, and whatever makes a certain actor comfortable. I think that's when they reach out to that makeup artist and say, look, I really like the way you do things, or I like the way you're thinking, or the way you touch me. So would you be interested? And that's how you start relationships with that actor. And then of course you have the department head who is in charge for the overall look of the movie. You have certain ideas, and you want to of course pull that through and make sure that everybody's on the same page. So I have extensive conversations with personals also, and so that we're all on the same page, like just in terms of looks, not like what they're doing per se, because that's then again between the actor and the personal. But we talk about skin colors, sweating. So if everybody else sweats, then of course they should be sweating too, or that we use the same type of blood colors, that not one's blood is all of a sudden like a dark red and one's is bright red, and so just it all comes together, and it doesn't pull you out of the movie. It's all about to create a common project. And yes, I do work very closely with hair department, which is it's very important, because they on this movie I think they used up to like 500 wigs, because some people they come, but because it's 2023, it was 2021 when we shot the movie. Then some guys had their hair cut, those under clipper cuts, undercuts, but not just it was from Osage people to us, to everybody. And so they had to create with they work with hair extensions and wigs and whatnot to create those looks. And of course, once you create a silhouette where somebody is in their costume and they have their wig on with their fashionable hairstyle, and they come into my trailer, then I basically know exactly what's required or what I need to do to support those looks. So everybody basically supports everybody's, or I do a makeup and then they go to hair. So they basically know how to style the hair according to the makeup. So it all sort of blends together.
So firstly, hearing about how many wigs we use on this film is quite incredible as well. Like creating 500 wigs that either have to have that distinct look, but then have to be set for each person's head. Quite what absolute Herculean task for people to create. But then also having the blending of the hair and makeup together so that it doesn't look incorrect and it looks all natural, shall we say. And there must be so many different sort of in a testing period of like what's going to look good, what's not going to look good, how are both they going to blend in, and then also if you're going for that traditional look of, I know you mentioned before as well, they're creating the no makeup look, which actually is harder because you're having a more of a naturalistic approach to how someone's going to look or feel. So I guess correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like when Molly herself is being poisoned and she's just sweating, but she doesn't have makeup on because she's getting ill and she's getting progressively worse. Is that something that's like very difficult to? You said that it's very difficult to create, but when you're doing it, showing them from going from slightly poisoned to more and more poisoned, how do you amp up the effect and make it look naturalistic and not not overdo it?
Well, in Molly's case, I had like 4 or 5 looks for her when which I designed after I did the breakdown. And then once we started in Oklahoma, we did makeup tests with everybody, and putting them side by side with Ernest, with Leo and Lily, and that you believe they're like in that certain situation, that they're again from the skin tones and everything that works. And then her illness, how she goes from fresh and healthy looking with some, you would feel the blood in her skin, like some rosiness, rosy cheeks, and then less of that, and then she gets a little paler, and then she has a little circles under her eyes, and then that gets darker, and then we with shading we try to create gauntness, and then of course to the time when she's like in bed and sweating, and then you add the layer of sweat on top of that. Yeah, so that's all. Again, that's called continuity, and you just try to, because when it starts. We have the healthy look goes from scene 1 to scene 35, and then from scene 35 to scene 39 is maybe the second look. Depending on what happens in the story. But yeah, so then you create that and add on. And I always say, when the AD department asks you, is like, what takes longer in terms of scenes that has been they're going to be shot on a certain day. Sometimes we talk about whether we should change the scene order if it's in the same place, the same house, in the same room. So because it doesn't matter what we do first, but if they ask me, I can always say, well, to add on is always easier than to take off, because I can start with like the no makeup look, which as we said is like involves also the makeup, but then the more it gets like the colors and all that, once you start adding, that would have been something that I would have added on in the trailer in the morning if we had started with that second scene in the day. And then when she has to look fresh and healthy, I would have to take that off. And then of course it's easier just to add it on rather than taking it off.
When you hear about adding on and taking off, because I think you basically start with minimal, then you can just add more and more and not worry about if you take off too much, and then going back and forth could be, I can imagine it could probably drive someone crazy. Especially if, as you said as well, you're a visual sort of person, getting it that just right as well would be quite difficult if you did it the other way around.
Yeah.
Just to get to my penultimate question as well, you've worked with some heavy hitters, such as Roland Emmerich on The Patriot, Coen Brothers on True Grit, and James Cameron for Avatar: Way of the Water. And now you're working with Martin Scorsese on this film. What was it like working with him, and how different was it compared to other directors?
That's an interesting question because I think, well, it was amazing to be to be asked in the first place and to meet Marty, and so I think his because it was so the whole project or the whole experience was so different because partially because of COVID. At the production office, nobody sat in the same room. They all had different offices, and they wouldn't talk to one. They wouldn't get up and go over to the next room and sort of talk, standing in the door, talking to the person sitting at the desk. So this all happened via Zoom or FaceTime, or so the meetings I had ahead of time with Marty were all like Zoom meetings or FaceTime, or just like over the computer on the computer. And then of course we had the tests, and once we all figured it all out, I think he put a lot of trust in everybody, which I thought was really great, because then he could really focus on the actors and didn't have to worry about what we're doing. Because I had put the question out there after we've been shooting for a couple of 3 weeks. I said to the line producer, we never, because sometimes, a director comes up to you and pats you on the shoulder and said, "Hey, wow, great, I love what you're doing," or whatever. And here, I mean, I didn't really never heard anything. And I said to our line producer, I just want to make sure that everybody likes what they're getting or what we're doing, and so that we're all on the same page. And he said, he looks at me and just laughed at me, and he said, "Look, if Marty didn't like what you're doing, you would have heard it 3 weeks ago. And, and just the fact that you're here, trust me, it's a very selective group of people. So just the fact that you're here should actually just be the answer of all your questions. So don't worry about it." And I said, "Okay, as long as no, thank you very much. I didn't look at it that way, but of course it's great to know."
I think as well, like if you're working on stuff and no one really says anything, it does make you worry because, as you said, it could be go two ways. They don't like it, or you're doing a really good job. And I guess as well, like as an artist, because it's such a visual medium, it's not like if you were working in an office crunching numbers, where it's just going to be very different. And it's quite funny how somebody says, "Yeah, he would have told you 3 weeks ago, so don't worry, you're doing a good job." And I think sometimes you just need to have that bit of not a pat on the back, but just to be told, "Yeah, it's all good. Keep up, keep it going, keep it going. We're really happy with what you're doing."
Yeah, and oftentimes, like in our job, is the less people see it or the less people mention it, it's actually that's the compliment. It's not if somebody says, "Oh my God," "Oh my God, that chin or those eye bags or that nose that you put on that person looks amazing." Well, if they point it out in that way, chances are it wasn't that amazing, because otherwise you wouldn't have mentioned it in that way, unless it's like Cyrano with has a nose like this. But it all has to become part of the character. And if the character really works, it doesn't stand out, and you just take it for what it is as the character, and it's less it's not as obvious. So basically it's the same as when they told me, if he wasn't happy with what you're doing because I didn't hear anything, that's the best compliment.
Yeah, exactly. And you kind of can get on with what you're doing and continue working hard and to create the looks for the film. Which leads to my final question. What was your favorite look to create for the film?
My favorite look to create for the film, well, it was definitely, I mean, Molly was really my main character in my chair, and I really loved creating those looks with her. And it was very interesting because at one point, when she gets really ill, that's towards the end of the movie, so they scheduled in a way so she could break away for a couple of 3 weeks to actually lose some weight and to get really sort of into the really ill character. And she's such a, call it, authentic actress, and there was a lot of thought that she put into these characters. And then towards that time, to be able to focus on her part, she wanted to eliminate, you know, because it was that man that ruined her life, basically. She wanted to kind of eliminate all the male influences in her for that character at that time during that period. So we gave her, or a girl that was actually working with me in the trailer, who then did that last stage when she's all sweaty and all that. And that was then because all the makeups that we did were all hand stippled and hand with sponges and brushes created. And then the last part was basically then like airbrushed and the sweat added over that. So she could just focus on that part, and I think it actually added another layer for her looks, and I'm very happy and proud of how that all turned out.
I think as well, like the gradual nature of Molly's character, because when you first see her, she has a very elegant look. As you mentioned as well, like her sister has that roaring 20s look with her hair and makeup, and then Molly's gone for that more sort of classic sort of looking and that beauty as well, that she's not showing herself off in terms of overloading her look, but in terms of, I don't know, it's hard to say sort of in words, not to say that, not to call her plain, but to say more of a naturalistic view of going for what she wants to, a naturalistic view of how she looks.
Right, and I have to say at this point also that, you know, they had put out open calls like a year prior to shooting, you know, to the Osage people that to see who's interested and want to participate in the project. And then COVID happened, and a lot of people, they were afraid that a lot of people wouldn't be available. But everybody who had actually had answered those calls in the first place, they all showed up, and there were a lot of people that were, you know, some worked with us in the cruise, but then also a lot of them were like background, or some had speaking parts sitting in our chairs in the trailers. There was so much information. For all these people had direct family members ties to this story of, like, you know, their grandmother's brother or sister or somebody had been killed, and so they did that. They participated because, you know, they wanted to find closure or move on and leave that part of the history behind. And so every day we had people in our trailer telling us their stories, and it was very emotional. There were a lot of tears. There was a lot of sadness. At the same time, it really helped us to realize how important the looks were for this movie, that we didn't sort of, you don't just go and like, oh yeah, we do this and we do that. So it's really, it was so sensitive, and we really wanted to support and be authentic of what that must have been like, to, you know, otherwise it would have been a slap in the face to all these people who are affected by that story.
When you have people that are being cast, I think the story about how Lily was cast is quite incredible. Because I think she was very close to giving up acting until she got a message from Martin Scorsese. But also when you do get those people with the background and other people that have been cast, and that this story is so close to them, it's very hard to sort of imagine what it must feel like stepping in, knowing that you're about to step into the world of like where your grandparents were, or your great grandparents or great uncle, and the sort of world that they were living in. But then also, depending on who they were, the fate that they must have had during that time. And it's probably like, as you said, like they're probably getting some closure, but it's also, it must be such a solemn affair for them to get over that, and to just be like, wow, like how much it like must mean to them as well. And then what you said as well in terms of like being respectful about the looks and how you wanted to create it, because the last thing you want to do is be disrespectful and then sort of basically, yeah, have it as a proverbial slap in the face for them.
Yeah, exactly. No, because I say, you know, this is I've worked on many movies, or most of the movies that I work on are based on a true story, you know, in one way or another. But then here I realized this is the true story, you know, and this is a totally different it's a totally different ballgame. I mean, it's a totally different situation.
Yeah, and uh, again, it's very hard to imagine what it's like for people, and so especially like if you've heard stories about how it must have been like for relatives, and then when you step onto set, that must give people some sort of, not necessarily like PTSD, but some sort of anxiety of like going on there to being like, wow, I've been transported into this world through like the production design and set decorating and the costumes and how everything's being played out.
Yeah.
Thomas, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Bobby.
The Killers of Flower Moon is out now in cinemas. Go out, go see everybody and Thomas's work on the big screen. Make sure you watch it on the biggest screen possible. Thomas, thank you again.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You take care and thank you. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.